been in our office, period, but been in our office for a press conference in particular, obviously going back to pre-COVID. So, in fact, I think in this matter, the Juul matter, I was taking a look back and we had our press conference on this was by Zoom back a couple of years ago. So it's great to see you in person. Hope you're all doing well, and thanks for being here. So my name is Bob Ferguson, Attorney General for the state of Washington. I'm joined by my team and a special guest who I'll introduce shortly. And we're here to announce the resolution of our lawsuit against Juul that we believe is significant and will help Washingtonians moving forward in addressing the issue of youth and vaping, which is a true epidemic in our state. The Office of the Attorney General in Washington State, as many of you probably know, has a long tradition of protecting youth from nicotine addiction, and that goes all the way back to Attorney General Chris Gregoire, who, as you may recall, helped lead the lawsuit against big tobacco that resulted in a massive settlement. And then later Governor Gregoire, then Attorney General Gregoire, was a key leader of the AG effort to hold big tobacco accountable. So really, since that time, our office has been deeply involved in issues related to nicotine addiction and with youth in particular. Today, we're announcing the resolution of our lawsuit against e-cigarette giant Juul. We filed the lawsuit in 2020 over the company's unlawful conduct that fueled a staggering rise in vaping use among youth here in Washington State, which also reversed many years, decades of progress in fighting youth nicotine addiction. As a result of our case, Juul must pay more than $22 million to the state of Washington. Importantly, Juul must also implement a slate of significant corporate reforms, including creating one of the most robust secret shopper programs in the country. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So first, let me provide a few introductions. So my team, as always, does a great job, and they did a great job in this particular case. This is a huge resolution, a very large settlement, as you know if you follow our firm of litigation. And so I'm joined today by Assistant Attorneys General Reen Thomaser. You'll likely be hearing from Reen later on in terms of answering questions, so I will spell Reen's name. Reen is R-E-N-E, Thomaser is T-O-M-I-S-S-E-R. So Reen Thomaser, July Simpson, and Joshua Wiseman. We're also joined by paralegal Sarah Curley. We're also joined by a special guest from outside of our office, but someone we know well because she's been a wonderful partner for us in our work in addressing the issues of nicotine addiction with youth, and that's Dr. Crystal Shen from the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. She was a partner with us specifically when we had AG request legislation to the state legislature to raise the age to purchase cigarettes, nicotine products, vaping products from 18 to 21. And Dr. Shen assisted us in that important work, which was successful with our state legislature. So I'm going to tell you more about our case and the details of Juul's corporate reforms. Then Dr. Shen will chat about the harms of youth vaping, of which she is most certainly an expert, and then we're happy to take any questions that you might have. So as I mentioned, in September of 2020, we filed this lawsuit against Juul for multiple violations of Washington state law, including deceptive marketing aimed at youth, similar to big tobacco. Juul fought our lawsuit. They tried to get our case dismissed. They filed what's called a motion to dismiss the case. Our team defeated that motion, and Judge North in King County Superior Court said the case should move forward. As a result of that decision and the fact the case was moving along, we were able to negotiate this resolution with Juul short of going to trial. So here's a couple of examples of how Juul targeted youth in our state. When Juul launched its device, it flooded social media with colorful ads of young-looking models in fun poses that mimicked many of big tobacco's ad campaigns. In fact, in short, what Juul essentially did was just borrow that playbook that big tobacco used all those years ago and brought it back into use in a slightly different context, and that is vaping products. At the same time, Juul pushed fruit and dessert flavored products such as mango and creme brulee. It launched the ads for these products on social media platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, with a significant underage user base. In fact, a 2018 study of Juul's Twitter audience showed that 80% of its followers were between 13 and 30 years old. Many of these underage users were posting about using Juul's products. Nonetheless, Juul denied it marketed to underage users, echoing the unlawful strategies used by major cigarette corporations in decades past. Juul's tactics were successful. From the product's launch in 2015 to the end of 2018, Juul gained control of more than 70% of the market share for e-cigarettes. Today's resolution holds Juul accountable for their unlawful conduct. The company must pay $22.5 million over the next 4 years. We will use this money to establish a new health equity unit in my office. The unit will work at the intersection of multiple legal divisions in my office, including civil rights, consumer protection, and complex litigation, and respond to deceptive and discriminatory healthcare practices that disproportionately impact vulnerable communities and communities of color. For the next 4 years, the unit will focus on enforcement, outreach, and education. Our case also requires Juul to clean up its act by implementing a slate of corporate reforms to help undo the damage that it caused, including Juul's most robust secret shopper program in the country. Let me give you just a couple details about that program. Under this, what we call a consent decree, this is the agreement that resolves the case and is filed with the court. So under this consent decree, it's a legally binding document that Juul is signing. Under this agreement, Juul is required to send secret shoppers to conduct no fewer than 25 compliance checks per month at Washington-based Juul retailers for 2 years. Juul must conduct these checks across all 39 Washington counties. During these checks, secret shoppers must confirm that retailers here in Washington state are complying with federal and state requirements to verify a purchaser's age. They also, these secret shoppers, will be confirming that the retailers are limiting the purchase of Juul products to 1 Juul device and 16 Juul pods per transaction. We believe this program is one of, if not the strictest secret shopper program implemented by a vapor product seller anywhere in the country. Juul is required to penalize retailers that fail to confirm the age of customers who purchase Juul products and report the results of its programs to the state. I believe those reports must come every 90 days. So every 90 days, they must report on how this program is going. Importantly, violations documented by the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board going forward also count as additional strikes against these retailers, right? So there's the secret shopper, this program, but also our clients, right? The State Liquor and Cannabis Board does its own checks. If they find a violation, that counts as a strike under this program. Juul must also stop all its advertising that appeals to youth and accurately market the content and effects of nicotine in its products. Juul is prohibited from marketing its products on Facebook and Instagram. The company must also implement practices to prevent underage youth from purchasing Juul products online. This includes requiring an ID-verified adult signature upon delivery of the products and limiting the number of Juul products that can be purchased online. These reforms are all legally enforceable. As I said before, if Juul violates any of these terms I've outlined, and there are many more that are more specific, we, my team, can go directly to King County Superior Court to enforce them. So now I'm going to turn the podium over to Dr. Shen to share more about why youth vaping is so harmful, and then we look forward to answering your questions. And as I mentioned before, Dr. Shen, doing this work is, to put it mildly, is a team effort. My team has a certain role on the enforcement side when entities are acting unlawfully, but there is so much more, obviously, to that goes on in the world of youth vaping and really the epidemic that we're facing as a state. Dr. Shen has been a leader in that, and it's an honor to have her here today. Dr. Shen.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Dr. Crystal Shen. I'm a pediatrician, and I represent the Washington chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about the health impact of vaping on youth. I've been working with youth and vaping prevention for the past number of years. And years ago, when vape products were newer on the market, we were still learning more about them, but we started to see more and more using them. I remember being so concerned when I heard about a 5th grader who was found with a vape pen. To me, that was just so young. And these were youth who never would have considered starting using cigarettes, but who were found with vape pens. Even more, a lot of these vape pens look like things that didn't look like cigarettes, didn't smell like cigarettes. A lot of parents wouldn't even know what was going on because these are so disguisable. I talked with middle school students, and every single one of these students in the student club that I talked to knew somebody else in their school who was their age who was vaping. This was just becoming more and more prevalent. Youth would go into school bathrooms and there'd be people vaping there, and this was just spreading so fast. And it was really, really hard because these vape products would have fruity flavors, so they'd just be very appealing to youth. You see something like mango, you think, oh, this isn't harmful, and this is just something fun. This is meant for youth, right? You have fruit flavors. However, this is farther from the truth than anything that you could think of, because inside of like these little vape pods, besides these fruity flavors that were so attractive to youth, you'd actually have a lot of harmful chemicals. Some of the flavoring chemicals have been associated with lung injury, and then there'd be nicotine in these. And I really want to talk about Juul amongst all these other vape products, because Juul pods came out, tiny little USB type sticks and like pods that are tiny. Look so small in comparison to a pack of cigarettes. However, one Juul pod would contain as much nicotine as a pack of cigarettes, and half of a pod was enough to addict a teen. And this is hard because you have youth who are like lured in by these really attractive flavors. They start vaping because they see other students doing it. It looks really fun. It doesn't look harmful. You see all these flashy ads. You're like, oh, I might as well try something. And then once they start, they become addicted. And to me, the harms of nicotine addiction are just so challenging. Young brains, adolescent brains, are still developing until your mid-20s. When they're still developing, your brains are so susceptible to the harms of nicotine. Nicotine can impact memory, learning, attention, behavior, can cause lots of different issues, and you're also much more vulnerable to the harms of lifelong nicotine addiction. When we had talked about tobacco 21 legislation in the past, this is because 95% of lifetime smokers started before the age of 21. And just so hard because your brain is just so vulnerable to nicotine. And I saw this specifically in clinic. I'd have patients coming in who started noticing that they were having issues with like breathing as deeply as it used to be. They'd be pretty athletic beforehand, but they noticed that they couldn't run as fast at soccer practice anymore. And they're like, hey, I really want to stop vaping. But at this point, they're already so addicted that it's so much harder than just saying, I want to stop vaping. I had talked to teens where even when they verbalized this desire to quit, they'd wake up in the morning and the very first thing that they would do was reach for their vape pen. I know a lot of us reach for our phones because we're checking for emails and other updates. Screen time is a different story, but this just really showcased to me that for teens who are addicted to vaping, it's just so challenging to quit. And there's so much that's needed to really help these teens who are already addicted, as well as help prevent youth from even starting vaping. So I've seen over the past number of years how significant vaping has become, how many youth are using vape products, and I specifically see how Juul has contributed to this. So many youth who would have never considered using cigarettes started vaping and already have this addiction that we're trying to help them with. So I am very, very glad for the opportunities that come from this decision. I feel like equitable enforcement is needed. We need to put the onus on retailers and not on youth for protecting youth from vaping. I care deeply about protecting youth from the harms of vaping for their health, but I also want to make sure that they're protected from enforcement that's inequitable. And so many teens from communities of color, LGBTQ youth, are most impacted by the harms of vaping and would also be impacted by different aspects. So I strongly believe that these resources will be helpful for equitable enforcement. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm always happy to talk more about such an important topic. And if people have questions about resources, I'm happy to direct people towards that too. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shen, and for all your work. Really, we appreciate it on behalf of the people of the state of Washington. And just before we take your questions, just the last thing I'll add is Dr. Shen, of course, we've talked about the impacts on youth. And, you know, for me personally, when we started doing this work, I'm not sure when we first proposed raising the age to buy vapor products and nicotine products to 21, but it's been a number of years ago now. You know, my kids were pretty little back then, right? So I don't want to say I didn't worry about them on those issues, but they seemed awfully young. Now they're about to go into high school, and these issues have a whole different resonance for me as a parent and my wife as a parent when you have kids who are right in that wheelhouse of that age where kids are vaping and suffering the consequences that you talked about. And so you know, that's the lens by which I look through these issues, which is the impact on youth in our state and large corporations who candidly put profit ahead of the people. Juul violated the law. They did it over and over again. The cost was significant, as you heard from Dr. Shen. for the youth of our state. And we believe this resolution, thanks to the team that successfully fought Juul in court, that went through the challenges of complex litigation that a case like this represents, and resulted in a resolution that is not simply strong in terms of the amount of money that they must pay to resolve this one single lawsuit. There are others across the country, but this one single lawsuit, but also those corporate reforms, and also the program that will, to your point, Dr. Shen, better ensure that retailers are following the rules and not selling these products to underage youth. So with that, we'll take your questions. I believe there are folks on the phone, and so we'll do is we'll start if anyone in the room has questions first. I will do my best to repeat the question for those who are on the phone. If I forget, just feel free to ask me to repeat the question, and we'll do our best to answer them. So we'll start if anyone in the room has any questions for me or the team. Yes.
Mr. Ferguson, what is your mechanism aside from the reports every 90 days for ensuring that Juul is actually complying with its part of this consent decree?
So the question is, in addition to the reports that Juul must file every 90 days, how else can we ensure that Juul is following this program? I guess what I would say, and I'll see if Reem wants to add anything to this, but I think any entity, and particularly in a case like this that has been high profile and hard fought, that those entities know we watch them closely once the case is resolved. We enter into these consent decrees routinely. That's what we do in any consumer protection action, for example, or civil rights enforcement. There's always this agreement. And so we don't simply stop once that is signed. We have our ways by which we follow up with investigations and do our own work to make sure these companies are following the rules. The other thing I will say is that because these are legally enforceable requirements, this consent decree allows us to, if they do violate the terms of the agreement, to short circuit all the lengthy process that got us to this point and go right before our judge and say, hey, they violated this specific term, and it's a shortcut to essentially getting an immediate resolution before a judge. So they also know by signing that consent decree that they violate the terms of that. It's different than starting up a brand new lawsuit. They essentially are legally in jeopardy right away and very quickly. Reem, is there anything else you'd add to that?
No, that's good.
Okay, so I think Reem's giving me the nod that that one was summed up reasonably well. So, but again, this is, while this consent decree is different, obviously, than what Juul is required to do, that mechanism for enforcement is what we do on a relatively routine basis.
And just as a quick
Yep.
follow-up, some of these things are limited, like the enforcement with retailers, to within Washington state. Some of it, like the advertising on social media, the ban on that goes beyond Washington state borders. Is there more in that that will affect Juul's operations nationally and internationally?
I guess I'm not sure I can say much about them nationally. Sorry, the question went to Juul, the enforcement of these types of terms nationally, for example, outside of the borders of Washington state. Obviously, we can control for Washington state specifically. I want to be clear about that, so thanks for asking that question. Number two, there are other lawsuits by other states. Two have resolved litigation, Arizona, North Carolina, I believe. Others, I think at least 12 other states, I believe, have filed litigation like ours. So this won't be the last resolution, I suspect, either in court or through a resolution. They'll have its own terms specific to those states as well. But this is a Washington state-focused resolution, which is the authority that I have. Any other questions here in the room? If not, let me open up to anyone online, and I think it's unmuted, hopefully, and if anyone wants to jump with a question, by all means, feel free.
I have a question.
So I'm hearing a female voice first and a male voice, so I don't know who those are. Let's start with the female voice.
Okay, this is Rachel, reporter.
Hi, Rachel.
Data Press and OSBS. Good morning. I just wanted to ask if your office had planned any other actions against other brands that use fruit flavors that may become popular with youth or that are already being used by younger people.
Thanks, Rachel. I think folks in the room heard the question, but I'll just repeat it. Rachel's asking, do we have other similar actions against other entities similar to this type of case? And so, Rachel, as I think you know, we don't make our investigations public until we file a lawsuit or there is a resolution. What I can say is we've been active in the past on these. We've done sweeps, for example, of online sellers of these products and reached resolutions with them. And so this isn't our first litigation or first investigation that's been made public. I think it's fair to say it won't be our last. But at this time, I don't think we have anything else we can announce right now about other public actions, but stay tuned for that.
This is David Gutman here. Can you hear me?
Sure can, David. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Attorney General. Yeah, David Gutman with the Seattle Times. You just said Juul violated the law and they did it over and over again. But under the terms of the settlement, they don't admit any wrongdoing. So why agree to the settlement? And is there a concern that you're letting them off too easy if they're violating the law, and that this is maybe just a cost of doing business for them?
Yeah, thanks for those questions, David. I think there's sort of multiple questions in there, but I'll sort of try and answer them in one shot. So first, it's unusual for any entity to acknowledge wrongdoing in any resolution that we have, whether that's us or any other state AG's office. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one is they face other lawsuits as well. So admitting wrongdoing for claims brought by other states, other local jurisdictions, in which in Washington State, I think there's at least 3 local jurisdictions, if not a little bit more than that, who filed their own lawsuits. Individuals can bring their own lawsuits as well. Nothing about our case prevents an individual or class action. So as you might imagine, entities simply won't admit to wrongdoing because that exposes them to even greater liability down the road. So that really never has been a condition for us or any other state AG when we resolve these cases. Number 2, I don't think $22 million is the cost of doing business resolution. Keeping in mind, David, we are one of many, many jurisdictions, states that have filed lawsuits against Juul. This isn't their first payment and won't be their last. So we're focused on harms in Washington State, and we believe that $22 million, not having to go through the expense and cost and uncertainty of trial, is for us one of our larger consumer protection type resolutions that frankly we've had in the AG's office's history. So that's a large resolution. In addition to, one thing that was important to me and I think to the team and to folks like Dr. Shen, who you heard about, was the enforcement mechanism of not just getting the payment, which is important from that accountability from that standpoint, but also instituting the corporate reforms that change their practices and also sends a message to retailers that there are secret shoppers coming to their business to make sure that the rules related to the sales to underage individuals are being followed. So taking all that together, we believe that this is a resolution that is a very positive one and a good outcome for us.
Hi there, this is Dee with Kyber 7.
Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Chesky.
Great.
Yeah, I was wondering, with the pandemic, obviously a lot has changed. Kids were out of school for a long time. They came back with masks. That's only recently changed. Are you able to share any perspective on how significant or how that's impacted the vaping problem in schools? I mean, is this still an ongoing issue in schools, or has that been significantly dampened because of the pandemic? I don't know if there's actual data on that or if you have any anecdotal experiences you can share.
Yes, that is a great question. And just to recap, I believe the question was, since I talked a lot about vaping in schools and how this is such an issue, during COVID, many people were doing online school, now they're back. So what is the impact of COVID and vaping in schools? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. And first off, I wanted to mention COVID has shown us that our lung health is more important now than ever. And that's why I want to help protect all of our lungs' health, especially from things that we can prevent easily. So we talked about COVID precautions. Everybody's been following so many different things. Even to get into this building, we're doing so many things to make sure we can gather safely in person. So important. And then protecting your lungs from vape chemicals is also incredibly important. There's actually a really wonderful article that came out of Stanford that talked about the incidence of COVID and youth who vape. And they actually had a lot of studies that showed that there was a higher connection between youth who vape and youth who caught COVID. And you can't always see that this is full causation. Some of it could be correlation and different things, but this really tied into aspects that I think are really important. And the Department of Health had issued different briefs too, showcasing that lung health can be harmed from vaping and can make you more susceptible to different harms from COVID. So this is why I think vape prevention and vape cessation is still so important. Studies have shown that when you stop smoking, your lung health recovers, makes you more resilient. And the same thing I think could be said too for vaping. And that being said, we still are seeing a lot of youth who are vaping. I'm not in the schools myself since I'm usually in clinic, but I have a lot of patients who are coming back after I'm in school, and I still see youth who are significantly addicted to vaping. I feel like there's so many different factors that could tie into this. I feel like Youth mental health has really increased in terms of needs during COVID. We've all seen how stressful this pandemic can be. Life is hard enough as a teen when you're navigating lots of changes. Dealing with 2 years plus of a pandemic is incredibly hard. And then nicotine can make your brain feel great initially. This is why people keep on using it. You inhale some nicotine and it makes your brain feel more relaxed, it makes you feel happier, may make you feel like less nervous at the time, but then your brain's already wired to need more and more and more nicotine, and this is why vaping is still such a huge issue. I can't speak about vaping in school bathrooms right now. I'm hoping people aren't doing that, especially when you think about aerosols and particles that are spreading in different places. But vaping during COVID is more important now than ever. And I'm happy to answer other questions too, hopefully address your question.
Thanks, Dr. Shen. Any other questions from folks on the phone? If not, thanks for those questions, by the way, and I'll come back to in the room here. Does anyone have any final questions before we wrap up?
I did just want to ask, with that $22 million, is some of that going to be used to sort of piggyback on existing programs as well for, reduction of youth smoking and vaping?
Yeah, so the question goes to $22 million and the use of that. So that money will be essentially invested into the work that we do. So back to Rachel's question about, hey, other work that may be going on. These investigations, I can assure you, are time-consuming and costly and often take years to do, as you might imagine, to do it well so you can bring a potential case. And so, yes, the idea is to reinvest that. The work that my affirmative divisions do, civil rights, consumer protection, antitrust, receive virtually no general fund support. It is an operation supported by the work that we do, in addition to the many millions we return to Washingtonians. So this is an investment into this work in the future and across multiple fronts related to health issues in Washington State. So, but we believe, and I guess just to bring this to a close, this has been a couple of years that we've had litigation, lengthy work in advance of that from the team to prepare us for litigation. And, Juul's conduct harmed Washingtonians. They harmed the youth of our state, as Dr. Shen's eloquently spoken about, as I think most of us understand intuitively, right? Nicotine is just so addictive. And a young person has enough challenges in their life that they don't need a company like Juul trying to manipulate them through their advertising and their corporate conduct into actions that will lead them to potentially facing years or a lifetime of addiction. So on multiple levels, the dollar amount, the corporate reforms, and the program to go to retailers and check to make sure they are not selling to retailers with real consequences and penalties if they do, we believe is a resolution that is a very positive one for Washington State and hopefully for the youth of our state as well. Thanks everybody who joined by phone. Thanks all of you for being here in person. It's great to see you all in person. Hope you have a great day. Thanks everybody for joining us.